This is always my favorite part. I always feel like everybody's like,
And
the doors are open.
The floodgates have
The
opened.
floodgates have opened.
I'm watching on my phone. I'm trying to see if it hasn't popped up yet live on my phone, but I think it's all starting to happen. Here we go.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
There we go. Let's mute that. All right. Well, I think we're here. I think we're live and ready for our event tonight. Welcome, everybody. Can you hear me okay, Julie?
yep.
Okay. We have an amazing author event this evening with Maggie Shipstead and Chloe Benjamin. I'm Sarah Stimson from Mission Viejo Library. Thank you so much for being here. And before we get started, as everybody is kind of getting situated and getting their technology just how they want it, just a few little things. Our library hosts many wonderful events throughout the year. So please, if you haven't already subscribed to our Facebook page, do that. You'll get the latest updates and also from our webpage. Don't forget to check the calendar for other author events like this. And tonight, this is part of our kickoff for our summer reading program. So if you have not yet signed up, please do so. You can do that super easy after the event tonight. It's just on our website. And it's a very low commitment. All you have to do is put in your information, and it's just a program to sort of motivate you to keep reading over the summer. And I just started Maggie's new book, and I gotta tell you, everybody, you're gonna wanna read it if you haven't already. So you might as well sign up for our program because you could win some prizes just for reading a book that you're gonna wanna read anyway after tonight. And I also would like to say a few thank yous before we get started. First and foremost, to my colleague, Kathy Dickey, who I think is going to be out in our audience tonight. Kathy, if you have attended our events over the years, is sort of the backbone behind our Writers Present series. Well before I came to the library 6 years ago, we've done many, many events together, and she is retiring next month. So this is our last event together. And I just want to give a huge thank you to Kathy for making so many of these events possible. I know we're going to keep seeing her, but as an audience member, not an employee, which is going to be super fun. So thank you, Kathy, very much from the bottom of my heart. And I would also like to thank Penguin Random House, the publisher for tonight, for sending Maggie to us, and also to Warwick's Booksellers, that's Julie, up in the corner there from Warwick's. And of course, a huge, huge thank you to both Maggie Shipstead and Chloe Benjamin. I feel a little starstruck that we have two amazing authors here tonight. So thank you so much for being here. Julie, would you like to take a moment to tell us about why people should buy the book from Warwick's?
Well, of course they should buy the book from Warwick's, but checking out from the library is always a good option too. But I always like to say, any way there is to get a book, you can get it from Warwick's. We are located in La Jolla, San Diego, California. We have a full on-site website, online bookstore for you. So if you're in the Mission Viejo area and you want us to ship a book to you, it's very easy. So for tonight, I'm going to put both Maggie and Chloe's books into the chat so that you can easily click on that. If you're in the San Diego area, we would love to see you. As you see, our store, my sign says 1896. We are celebrating our 125th anniversary this year. So Warwick's is not the oldest bookstore in the country, but the oldest continuously family owned. So we are very proud of our legacy of bringing wonderful authors. In fact, Chloe, I don't think we had the pleasure of hosting you I know we need to get you for your next book, but Maggie, we've had the pleasure of having you for your debut, I believe. And so that was really fun. So hopefully one of these days we'll have live events, hopefully starting with the library. We can do some things together and also down at the store. So like I said, I'm going to put those book links into the chat. If you have any questions tonight, if you scroll over your screen, there's a little Q&A button at the bottom. Maggie and Chloe are going to talk for about 35-ish, 40 minutes, and then Sarah's going to come back in. So don't be shy. Put some questions into that Q&A, and Sarah will bring those into the conversation. There is actually, I think it's going to expire. I'm not sure when it's expiring, but we do have because of the Summer Reads program, we have a 20% off for you, and I'll try and find that code and put that into the link too for Maggie's book for Great Circle. So anyways, I won't talk anymore. Let's get on with the show. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Julie. We love working with you. We love working with Warwicks.
Thank you.
And so now I know
Bye, everybody.
everybody's excited. We're about 6 minutes in, so let's get this show on the road. And I'm going to introduce our speakers tonight. Chloe Benjamin is the author of The Immortalists, which I have here, and you probably remember. This is an amazing cover, by the way, Chloe. So whoever did your artwork, I'm giving huge props to. I love the cover of this book. She was a New York Times bestseller. She's also written The Anatomy of Dreams. She was a Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers selection, a Library Reads favorite, and a #1 indie pick. The Immortalists was named a best book of 2018 by NPR, The Washington Post, and Entertainment Weekly, among others. So huge congratulations on that. She's originally from San Francisco, a graduate of Vassar College and the MFA program in fiction at the University of Wisconsin, where she still lives now. And our main speaker tonight, Maggie Shipstead. This is her new book, Great Circle. If you don't have it already, follow that code and please buy it. You will not regret it. She is the New York Times bestselling author of Seating Arrangements, Astonish Me, and now her newest book. She's the winner of the Dylan Thomas Prize and the LA Times Book Prize for First Fiction. She's a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and a former Wallace Stegner Fellow at Stanford. And she is the recipient of a fellow from the National Endowment of Arts. And I'd like to think that she's sort of local to Mission Viejo and grew up here, and she now lives in Los Angeles. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone, and welcome.
Hi, Chloe.
Hi, Maggie. I'm so excited to be here. I had been trying to not do any events for the summer, and then my publicist told me about this one, and I couldn't resist. I have been a fan of your work for years now, and I was just remembering as we were sitting here getting ready to go that I'm pretty sure I wrote you a fan letter after I read Astonish Me. I don't know if you even remember this, but it was your novel. Well, obviously you remember the novel, your novel about the ballet world. And as a former dancer, I was so impressed by the research that you did and the seamless way that you incorporated it. So I'm just thrilled to be here with you talking about your latest.
Oh, thank you. Likewise, I'm also a fan. And yeah, I think I remember that just because the hearing from dancers was like the most special thing after Astonish Me, because I wasn't a dancer. And so I was always a little bit worried. So that always meant a lot.
Well, clearly you are an incredible researcher and incorporate that into your work in a way that can fool even former dancers. So let's get into this novel. I'm always interested in the spark of a novel, that initial burst of inspiration. And I read that you came across a statue of Jean Batten, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who was the first pilot to fly alone from England to New Zealand. So I'm wondering from there, how did you go about piecing together all of the many plot lines and characters in this book? And did you take any interesting left turns? So in other words, did the book end up similar to or far afield from the way that you initially imagined it?
Well, yeah, so I saw this statue in fall of 2012. And so Seating Arrangements was out and I was waiting for edits on Astonish Me. And I'd been traveling and I thought I was working on a different project. And while I was traveling, this project just kind of died. And I was like, okay, I have to do something else. And so I was feeling sort of a little bit lost and kind of sorry for myself. And so I was at the airport and just saw this woman, this pilot, and there was a plaque next to the statue with a quote from her, which said, "I was destined to be a wanderer." And I was like, oh, I should just write a book about a pilot, a female pilot. And I didn't really think anything beyond that, but it just like struck me with this certainty. And I really didn't start working for another 2 years. I started working in fall of 2014 on Great Circle with virtually no plan. I can never plan or outline my books. And so I just have to sort of start. Excuse me. And so yeah, I usually have like sort of waypoints, I call them. So I knew that I would have Marion Graves, my pilot, transport warplanes in World War II. And I knew she could do this either in the US or the UK, but I hadn't decided which. Sorry, it was a helicopter. And so I wrote the beginning as the beginning of the book still is, with this line, "I was born to be a wanderer," which was drawn from the plaque on the statue. And then for reasons lost to time, I was just like, and I'll start with a ship launch. And so sort of went back before Marion was born and started working forward. So I guess the book in some ways was exactly as I planned, because it was about a pilot, but in other ways had nothing to do with it. Like, I had no concept of the structure. I didn't know how big and sprawling it would be. I didn't know how many different elements I would bring in, which I kind of need that freedom just to have an impulse and follow it, although it definitely led me astray from time to time. And there were certainly some plot points that needed to be corrected, and the structure went through a few sort of rejiggerings, like the section of the book that is Marion's flight around the world over the poles, and is now sort of concentrated at the end of the book in one section, initially was sort of broken up and was scattered interstitially throughout. And I tried different tactics for that too. Like, I tried to write it in her voice in first person as though it were the actual logbook. And then, yeah, I had lots of little minor structural crises, but I just kind of had to let it unspool.
It's always a comfort to me when other people sort of take the, like, no pun intended, but the wing it approach. There's a great quote by, I think, E.L. Doctorow. You may have heard this, that says something like, writing a novel is like driving a car at night. You can only see as far as the headlights show you, but
Yeah.
you can trip that way. And I love that, and have always identified with that as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a helpful, I use that quote too a lot. I think it's really helpful for explaining sort of to non-writers, like, how much you need to know. And I really think it's sort of, you're born one way or the other as a wing it person or a plan it person. And I don't think you can fight it. Like, I've tried to outline books before, and it just is immediately deadening to me.
It takes the magic out. I think part of the fun of writing the first draft is figuring out what you're actually trying to write. You sort of discover your impulses as you go along. So speaking of surprises, this book is sort of pitched in the jacket as being about Marion and Hadley, and of course it is. But because that was all I knew going in, I was really surprised and kind of delighted to discover all of these other characters that we follow over great spans of time and space. Jamie and Caleb, I think, almost get as much time as the two central women. And then there are so many delightful secondary characters, from Sarah to Ruth and Eddie, and so many more. I'm curious if there are certain characters that kind of had a hold on you, ones that you just found yourself having to write more about. I'm always curious if readers can tell which characters are our pets, and like, maybe we shouldn't let that come through too much. But did you have any pets or any beloved characters?
I don't know. I feel like I feel sort of little attachment to all, that's wrong. I feel sort of maximum attachment and no attachment to all my characters. So there's no one who I particularly, I guess, like more than the others. I just sort of try to inhabit them. But I mean, I think in some ways the proliferation of characters in this book or points of view is also just like, could be looked at as a lack of discipline. Like, I would get to a point, and like in the book where we first followed Jamie when he's a teenager, Marion's twin brother, and it follows him to Seattle. And I started writing that chapter, and I was like, this will just be a quick little, 10-page glimpse of Jamie off doing something else. And then it sort of sprawled out into one of the longest chapters in the book, I think, and then redirected the whole course of the book, because then suddenly I was sort of responsible for Jamie's plotline. So I did come to care, and I think my relationships with the characters develop over time too. Like, I hadn't thought very much about Jamie until I wrote that part. And then once I wrote that part, I was much more invested in him. And with Caleb, Marion and Jamie's childhood friend, who sort of comes back in Marion's life in various roles, I felt maybe he was my pet. I guess if there was a pet, it might be Caleb, partly because I kind of gave him the opportunity to love Marion in a sort of pure way. I think he really allows her to be herself in a way that maybe nobody else quite does.
Yeah. Well, moving to another central relationship in Marion's life, one thing that really hit me hard and I think will stay with me is the relationship between Marion and Barclay McQueen, who, without giving too much away, is initially her benefactor and sort of becomes more than that. I found the power differential in their relationship fascinating and disturbing and so well done. I think these relationships can easily be flattened in fiction into kind of good and evil, the good one and the bad one. And I thought you did such a skillful job of exploring the many contradictory feelings and dynamics that exist within that relationship, even as it decidedly begins to veer in an unhealthy way. Was that a difficult relationship to write? And did you know that arc at the outset? How did you sort of discover what would become of Barclay and Marion?
Yeah, I didn't know the arc. A lot of my plot, I think I build out of necessity. So Marion needed sort of a patron at that point, and he was who I invented for that. And then I think, I needed him to be compelling, and also just wanted him to be compelling as an author, as, someone that would draw Marion's attention and attraction and her emotions. And then I think both of them they are who they are, but they're also distorted by the relationship and by the circumstances of it. And it's always interesting for me to see how Barclay's written about in reviews. And some people are like, he's the most, heinous villain. And I didn't really think of him that way. I thought of him as somebody who was, turned into something he possibly didn't want to be, or maybe was deep down, by not being able to have what he wanted. And then other people react differently. Like my agent's dad was like, I wouldn't want to be friends with anybody in this book except for Barclay McQueen. We were like, maybe.
That's about
Yeah.
I felt kind of an internal struggle reading about it, because there is this kind of magnetic pull between them, even when there's let's just say a strong age gap. And I was kind of like, am I rooting for these people? Should I root for these people? But again, I think the whole way through, you never lose the complexity. And for me, that's what I'm most interested in as a reader.
Yeah, I listened to the Nerdette podcast, did Great Circle as their book club this month. And so just the other day, I listened to this discussion, their book club discussion on the podcast, and it was really nerve-wracking to listen to people talk about the book for 50 minutes because I didn't know what they were going to say. And so they talked about Barclay for a while, and somebody had called in and said, like, there's a creep factor. And then the three hosts of the podcast were sort of going back and forth on that. And some of it has to do with the era. Like, it was much more common for teenage girls to be married off in the 20s or early 30s, maybe, I can't remember. And then also this sort of like frontiersiness of the setting and this and that. And so it was, I would write anyone who's conflicted about Barclay McQueen. It was a good discussion. It was illuminating for me even. And somebody was saying how he sort of enters the story almost like a romance novel hero. Like he's going to facilitate the dreams of the heroine, just out of altruism. And then it turns out that's not quite what's happening. And so it's sort of a reversal of that, which wasn't something I thought through in those terms, but I think is a pretty apt description.
Yeah, and I don't know if this was intentional or if it was just my reading, but I kind of felt like the relationship with Caleb moved in the opposite direction, where in the beginning, as kids, they're sort of stubbornly aromantic. And maybe they're lying, but I actually believed them. And so as there develops a much stronger emotional core to their relationship, I was a little bit surprised in the way that I was a little bit surprised when the opposite happens with Barclay, but I liked that.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but I think that's true. That's very wise.
So I see this book in the tradition of other big epic books that I've loved, like The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, and The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. I'm curious if there are any other books that you looked to or that you read while you were working on this, that fiction, I mean, that sort of helped you to explore this kind of book? And also what it was like to write a book that spans so much time and space, but also pages. How did the experience differ from working on your first two books?
Well, I'll take the second part first. It was horrible. It was really, really hard. It just took forever. My first draft, and really the draft that I sold, was 980 manuscript pages. So it was almost 300,000 words. And this, as it is now, it's under 600 pages typeset, but it'd still be about 750 manuscript pages. So we cut, a quarter of the length in edits, which was a lot of work. But, I think when I sit down to write, I have so much anxiety about doing it wrong. Like, I think inevitably you do it wrong. Like, there's no way to just sort of efficiently write the final draft of your novel, but I can't like quite let go of that hope. So it was really hard for me to make peace with the fact that I was writing more than I needed to, and that I was going to have to rearrange and tear it apart and put it back together. Really, I think the hardest moment, like the lowest low point, was about 2 years into writing the first draft. The first draft took 3 years and 3 months. And I had, 400 and something pages. So it was longer than either of my previous books. And I could tell I wasn't halfway there. And I was just like, I don't know, what am I doing? Like, is this a thing? Because I don't really have early readers. So nobody had read it. I couldn't really tell, if it worked. I didn't know if I'd be able to land it. I didn't fully know where it was going. Other people were publishing books, so I felt a little bit left behind. And so that was really hard. And I just had to find a way to just sort of go day by day and sort of put my head down and do the little bit that I could. So that was much harder than my other books. My other books, I wrote each of them in less than a year. And I wrote Astonish Me in like 5 months, like from starting to selling it, which I think gave me unrealistic expectations for writing books. So there was a lot of adjusting that happened. I started travel writing in that time too. So my life was also just sort of changing. And then the first part of your question about other books, yeah, I mean, there were a lot. The ones that you mentioned are all books that I really love. I love The Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert. I read that a couple times, and that was a book I'd often sort of have on my desk to just sort of read a few pages from. Life After Life by Kate Atkinson, which has an amazing structure that at the beginning I was like, I don't know about this. And then by the end I found it exhilarating, which I would also say is true of Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. All the Light We Cannot See. Those are kind of the big ones, I think. Oh, and then Veronica by Mary Gateskill was kind of my touchstone for Hadley, more than any other book, I think.
Interesting. I always love hearing about which writers inspire other writers, even though when I'm asked that kind of question, I freeze up and forget every book I've ever read.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm like almost 2 months into this, so.
But some of those I've read and some I haven't, but I can see what you mean with the ones that I have. I wanted to jump back to what you said about that low point, not knowing whether you could pull it off. I identify with that so much. I tend to pick ambitious subjects that remain an open question, and I, like you, I have manuscripts in which I wasn't able to. But my question for you is, do you think, like Marion, it wouldn't be able to hold your interest if it wasn't that big of a risk? Like, if you knew you could pull it off, would you be interested enough to write it?
I don't know. I mean, for the sake of my next book, I hope so. I'm really trying to take fewer risks on this one. I think it's just different things feel like different sorts of risks. I don't know if it's this way for you too, but like I've been sort of on a Sue Miller kick. And her novels, I feel like, are these really pay incredibly close attention to these sort of domestic relationships over time. And just keeping that focus so narrow would make me very anxious, even though in some ways it seems simpler, is in some ways simpler than like what this book does. But there are things I just read The Senator's Wife, and she'll sort of go down to the detail where it's like, he closed the bread bag and put it in the pantry. And like, I would sort of never write that sentence. And yet I'm interested in it as a reader, just for some reason, by the way she does it. So I don't know. I mean, I think I'm always drawn, I think my interest is held by changes in subject matter. I mean, my 3 books have been really different. My short stories are all really different from one another. Um, yeah, and this book, I think I just put sort of everything I thought was thinking about and caring about during these years that I was writing. It kind of all went in. So I really didn't hold back sort of my sort of heart and soul on this one. So I don't know. I think every experience is different and every book probably feels like you can't do it, unfortunately.
Well, what you mentioned about the difference in the subjects of all of your books is something that I noticed as well. I've heard it said that every writer has their obsession, the thing that underlies all of their work. And I feel like now that I'm working on my 3rd book, I'm just starting to figure out what that is.
Mm.
I'm curious, do you feel like there's some impulse or dynamic that underlies all of your work, or is it just fresh every time?
I think somebody who interviewed me drew the connection that all my books are kind of about obsession
Mm.
in different ways. Seating arrangements may be the least, although Win Van Meter, the main character, is sort of obsessed with finding belonging and with joining clubs. And then Astonish Me, it's this sort of quest for perfection and the impossibility of perfection. And then this book, the obsession with flight and with freedom, and also the impossibility again of sort of contending with the vastness of the world and with time and sort of the limits of a lifespan. So I can really see how my 3 books overlap, and kind of the sharpness or the sour sharpness of the voice of Seating Arrangements is in the Hadley parts of Great Circle, and the sort of earnest intensity of Astonish Me is in there as well. And then yeah, that's sort of preoccupation with obsession and fixation. So I don't know. The way I'm sort of thinking about my next book, I don't really see that being in there, but I think maybe our sort of themes, I guess, just are cleverly finding new embodiments at all times.
Well, let's switch gears and talk about Hollywood. I am not a Hollywood insider, but the way that you wrote about that subculture certainly rang true to me. And so I have 2 questions about Hollywood. The first one is, I know you live in LA. Do you feel like you sort of through osmosis glean a lot about that industry from being in such close proximity? Or was this another area of research for you?
Yeah, I think you definitely get a lot through osmosis. And most of my friends in LA work in Hollywood in one capacity or another. They're screenwriters or development executives or agents, whatever. And so it's very much, just in the air. I did do some research, as particularly just on the mechanics of how a movie's made. I was an extra in a friend of mine's movie, so that was interesting, just being on set, and realizing, oh, like, you're filming a dark bar scene and it's the middle of the day and it's 1,000 degrees because you can't have the air conditioning on because of the noise, and just the sort of boredom of it. I think Hollywood is both really mundane and really dull and just work a day. It's people doing their jobs, and it's also like batshit crazy at all times. So yeah, it's such a funny culture. And one thing I really wanted to do with Hadley's storyline was just play with sort of what is familiar about Hollywood too. And I had done this before in a short story. I'd written kind of a Scientology short story that was a take on Katie Holmes and Tom Cruise, in sort of an intense first person voice. And so I'd worked with that voice before, but I didn't initially conceive of anything like that coming into this book until I'd been working for a few weeks or maybe a month, writing the early stages of Marion's story. And then I just sort of out of the blue wrote a Hadley scene where she's leaving a bar, cheating on her boyfriend, being photographed. And it just felt like the missing piece. And I felt like, yeah, I could in some ways like meet the reader sort of halfway. Like probably most people are familiar with some of these sort of elements of Hollywood, even though also like there's kind of a Me Too moment in the book with a predatory producer, and I'm pretty sure I wrote that before the Harvey Weinstein scandal broke, and I think that sort of goes to show you how familiar that was to us, already. Like I've said this before, but I think, Harvey Weinstein, that was such a bombshell, but it was also completely unsurprising to anyone who's sort of been paying any attention at all. So yeah, it was just like a rich sort of world to play with and riff on.
As you were talking, I was thinking about how I feel like another thing that underlies multiple books of yours is an interest in subcultures. I don't know if that feels true to you, but there's such insular and specific worlds, and I think that's really why I was so impressed that you wrote Astonish Me the way you did, because I think I had either read or maybe you mentioned that you weren't a dancer, and it is really hard to pick up on the small details of a subculture that you're not a part of. So I see you kind of entering these different communities with their own codes and language, and that's fascinating to go along with as a reader.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know, maybe it's just a willingness to sort of blunder in or something, and also hopefully to be aware of what I don't know. Like this whole write what you know thing, I think is so limiting. It's like, well, you can always learn, like you can find out about things, and I think sometimes writing about something as an outsider, you're more attuned to it than someone who'd grown up in that subculture. I guess I'm thinking mostly about seating arrangements. Like I think coming into sort of high wasp New England life as someone from California, things stuck out to me that you wouldn't necessarily question if it was where you'd spent your life. So, there are always advantages and disadvantages to every sort of angle.
Yeah, I totally agree. I always say, rather than write what I know, I write what I want to know. In part because I feel like my life has been interesting enough to write a novel about. So yeah, we need other material. So I wanted to jump back to research, and if there are any writers in the audience, they might be curious, as I am, to know about process, especially when it comes to research. Do you do all of your research up front? I'm guessing no, based on the way you've talked about the book so far, but I know some writers who do this and then they just jam on the draft. I research, then write, then research, then write. So I'm curious which is your way, or if there's a third option I don't know about.
Yeah, just no research, just make it up. Yeah, I definitely do your model, the research and write. I remember doing an event with Lisa C once, and she was describing how before she writes the book, she does all her research and she sort of color codes it and puts in this elaborate filing system, and then she just goes forward. But I have no idea what I need to find out, which is, I don't know if you find this as well. It can be very frustrating. Like it's like always swimming upstream. I'll start the book, I'm like, great, I need to learn about flying, but it's like, no, actually first I need to learn about ocean liners and shipping and where a fashionable family would live in New York in 1914, and just everything. I try as hard as I can to avoid anachronism, not to make assumptions. And so I'm constantly just hitting these questions where I'm like, well, would they have had electric light? Like now I have to go find out. And the internet obviously is an incredible resource, but it's not always easy to find out what you need to know. And it's something just that's an element of everyday life that wasn't necessarily commented on, and has, regional differences. So I would sort of, do the research I needed to do, have a sense of relief, write 3 pages, hit the next question, order a bunch of used books online, dig around, watch some videos, write another 3 pages. And it just never ended. And I tried to avoid, I think like the hard thing is to be like, well, I went to the trouble of looking this up, like now it has to go in. And there was definitely a bit of that which got trimmed out. And then there are things in the book too that are, book this long, there's always this question of like, well, does it have to be in there? With like the sort of sections that go back through geological history. And it's just like, no, it doesn't. But like, that's sort of inherent to a novel. Like they're not, essential. Like the pieces of a novel are pretty much not essential no matter what. So I sort of made peace with that as well as I was working.
That is like, I'm laughing because that is exactly my process, down to the frantic used book search and purchase. It's like, well, I can't possibly go on without having read this, obscure but totally necessary book. And then I get the book and like it sits on my shelf for 2 years and I read the introduction and then I'm like, actually I didn't need it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I have like some textbook on plate tectonics and I had like one question, and it didn't end up in the book anyway, but what can
or
you do?
worse, sometimes I'll like write a long email to someone that I know asking for, I'm like, okay, so I know that you did X and I'm wondering if you know why. And then I've sent it. And then like 8 hours later, I'm like, I don't actually want to go down that road.
Like, oh, wait, I don't care.
But this actually made me think of my second cinematic question. Thinking about the level of detail in the book, there's a way in which it reads to me really cinematically. And I think it's part because the dialogue is so excellent. I'm curious if dialogue comes easily to you. It certainly feels really vivid and has that kind of natural rhythm that I love in dialogue. So I'm curious, do you feel like you write in sort of the cinematic way that it reads? Do you kind of see it play out in your mind in that way? And also, do other art forms inspire your work? Looking at ballet and Astonish Me and now the film industry here.
Yeah, I think I do. I don't think my drafts really change that much. So I think the style from the beginning is pretty much what it is at the end. I mean, with cleanup and pruning and rearranging, of course, but I think in all my books, there have been pretty big sections that sort of survive unchanged. So I think it kind of comes out that way. Yeah, I definitely, well, I think I do think, I try to think visually. I'm not super visual inherently. So I think sometimes when I'm stuck, I'll try to force myself to think a little more visually and just picture what's going on or what it would look like in a movie. I think sometimes that can be sort of helpful because that's the way probably, we encounter maybe most of our narrative now is through sort of visual cuts and transitions. I think I am influenced by other art forms, but in this sort of like, I don't know, maybe solipsistic way where I think, in Astonish Me, when I was writing about ballet, I was also kind of writing about writing just sort of the impossibility of perfection, but how it always seems like it's right there. And like, this will be the time you do something perfectly. Obviously the differences in those two art forms were also interesting to me, just the physicality of dance and the collaboration and versus sitting alone in a room and not moving. And then I think in Great Circle it was a little bit about film, but I think I was more maybe in conversation with visual art just because of Jamie being an artist and his sort of attempts to, in his paintings get at sort of, I think in the book it's called like the too bigness of the world and how it can't like quite be put on canvas. And I think that was a lot of what I was contending with this book as well, is like, how do you convey the impossibility of conveying what you're trying to convey?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I think we probably have time for one more question from me, and then we'll switch over to the Q&A. So I'm wondering, what was your favorite part of this book to write? Like which part brought enjoyment? I know that so much of writing can feel like a push, or the perfectionism makes it hard to just feel pleasure. But were there parts that brought you pleasure, and any parts that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, I enjoyed different pieces of it at different times for different reasons. I mentioned earlier I started travel writing during the time I was writing it and for magazines. And so I sort of I there's this sort of symbiotic relationship between my travel writing and this novel, where I was seeking out assignments to the places that I knew Marion was going to go in her flight around the world, north-south. And so I wanted to go to Antarctica, I wanted to go to the Arctic, and I've always been drawn to those places anyway. They're just profoundly interesting to me. So kind of going out there and gathering my own experience of these places and then translating them into the book, that brought me pleasure that in some ways, like, I can be sort of pedantic about geography and about the world. And so I could really be super precise, get it down the way that seemed correct to me, but also was connected to Marion's story and with her quest and her experience of her flight and what the world would have meant to her, seeing the world in this way. And then I also really did enjoy writing Hadley's sections because they were more free in a way, like they required so much less research that there was sort of the only part that I could just kind of like write and not have to stop and buy used books, and dig through. I'm gonna change my angle. My son is coming through my door and blinding me. Yeah, that was just sort of pleasurable for the speed, and also to be able to sort of have more humor in her sections. I felt like her voice in some ways, just being a modern voice, was a relief. And then I think, yeah, the just finishing it was sort of the most sort of that was the happiest I was writing the whole book, was just when I knew that it could be complete.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many analogies to Marion and other characters. That risk is scary, and for many years writing a novel, I did not make up this quote, but I don't remember who did, is like having an unmade bed. So it's like your bed made for 7 years, and it's just, it just grates on you. But
that is perfect. I've never heard that, and that's the exact feeling. Yeah, and you can't make it.
No, you just have to like deal with it for years. So I totally understand. I think getting to the end of a book like that and realizing that you did it, like you flew across the world, you you finished it, is a huge deal. Well, thank you, Maggie. I will hand things over to Sarah.
Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you so much, both of you. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
Kind of scary coming back in because you never know. But this has been so great. So we do have some questions in the Q&A, so we'll jump right in. We have a few more minutes, and I'm sorry up front if we don't get to all of the questions tonight. But we have a question from Sylvia for you, Maggie. Do you by chance have a family member who constructed a textile piece for this book?
I do. I wish I could insert a photo, though I'm unprepared for that. Yeah, my mom toiled in secret for 5 years on a quilt. My mom's a prolific and incredibly skilled quilter, making a sort of wool applique quilt that was about the book, but more about sort of the journeys I made in researching and writing this book. And so she took photos that I'd taken in the Arctic and the Antarctic. And I should mention also my mom, I had a travel assignment to Antarctica and my mom came with me. So she's also been there and seen penguins. And so she has all these different species of penguins. She has ships that I was on. She has explorers' huts that I visited. It's totally extraordinary. It's really, really beautiful. And I think that person must have known that. But yes, it's an incredible gift.
Okay, I'm a little suspicious, Maggie, because I think, not to embarrass you, but your mom might be one of our attendees tonight. So I'm so glad that you gave a shout out to your mom.
She's a regular. Yeah.
That's so wonderful. We love moms supporting their daughters in writing and their kids in everything they do. So, okay, let's see. Our next question is from Cheryl. She says, Maggie, I read and really enjoyed your short piece on Beryl Markham some time ago. How much did she inspire your novel?
Yeah, so this was ages ago, actually. In The Guardian, they asked people to write a piece, and the theme is my hero. And Beryl Markham was a pilot who flew in East Africa in sort of the 20s and 30s and was the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic against the wind, so from Europe to the US. And she was kind of, I mean, in some ways she's not my hero. She was sort of an agent of chaos. She was always having affairs. She was this total man-eater. But she lived this really vibrant, wild life, and was a really skilled and charismatic pilot. And I think she's just incredibly cool. So, and her book West with the Night is a classic, and was sort of forgotten and had this resurgence in the 80s, and is an amazing piece of writing. So her sort of spirit, I think, like many female pilots, is in this book. And I found her, yeah, very interesting. I'd recommend that book to anyone. And one of my sort of thoughts in beginning this book as well was just that Amelia Earhart's kind of the only female pilot that people think of, but there are actually a lot of very famous female pilots in this era, and they just aren't remembered because they didn't disappear in quite this spectacular way.
I love that. One time somebody said to me, make sure that you're the main character of your own life. And so sometimes I think about, like, when we hear about these people who were maybe questionable in their morals or ethics, but they certainly seemed like they were the main character of their own life. That really rings true for me. So
I think Beryl Markham was the main character of a few people's lives.
well, that's like the ultimate quest, I guess,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Oh, the sun is following me. All right.
I love that. Okay. We have a question from Dave, and Dave says, "Ooh, I like Dave's question." So Dave, if you're still out there, thank you for this. He says, books about women written by women are sometimes viewed by men, or actually, Dave, by a lot of people, men and women, as chick lit. What do you say to this? Why should a man read books like this? And P.S. I'm a man who enjoys them.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of a bugaboo for all, not all, but for many female authors. I don't know, it's half the people in the world are women, and yet the experience of men is taken as sort of the default human experience. So I think some of that perception is just from practice. I think this has changed a lot even from when I was in school, but just most of the books we read were told from the point of, were by men and from the point of view of men. And so that's just what you're accustomed to reading. And everything else seems like a variation on that theme, when really it's just also a human experience. Yeah, I mean, I think men should read them because they're interesting, hopefully. I mean, I think there's a whole range in books by both men and women of sort of quality of thought and quality of prose and attention to characters. And I think, women from childhood appreciate that men have fully formed consciousnesses and have interesting lives. And I think there's plenty of room to return the favor.
Well spoken. Chloe, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, I think men should read books by women for the same reasons that they read books by men. As Maggie said, this is there's no reason why one should be ignored. I think it's important to read books by all kinds of people who are different from us. That's part of what reading can do.
All right.
Yeah, I think my overwhelming sort of philosophy about books too is like the more the merrier. Like there can and should be books about everything, all different kinds of books. And it would, yeah. And I think it's sort of our best way to get inside the consciousnesses of other people is to read. And I do think it broadens our understanding of other people's lives.
Most definitely. I'm not a writer, but as an avid reader, I feel like there's definitely books I go to for comfort, but I also really love being exposed to things a life I would not live, or ideas I would not have, because that's not my life. And so I think that plays in really well to this. Sometimes deliberately picking up a book that is not your experience can be very, exhilarating, eye-opening, all of those things that you two both so eloquently said. Okay, Maggie, how do you go about selecting your character names?
Kind of just by feel, I guess. Sometimes I'll sort of try to collect them. Like when I was in graduate school in Iowa City, I would go to the cemetery. and look at gravestones. And that's how I got the last name Van Meter for my first book, Seating Arrangements, Win Van Meter. And so I might, if I'm feeling stuck, I might sort of flip through a baby name book or through a phone book, something like that. Or if I see a name that sticks with me, but sometimes I just sort of, kind of think them up and it sort of feels right or it doesn't. And sometimes I'll change them too. Like sometimes I'll name a character and then a little bit down the road, maybe as I've started writing them, I'll be like, this person isn't a John, this person's a Steve, but it is tricky. And I think names are really important.
Definitely names, I think, are big for readers. So if any of you out there are keeping a little notebook, if you're writers, it sounds like very talented writers do the same thing. Okay, we have one here from your old history teacher, Diane Adamson. She said, we read your book for our book club and the feedback was so positive. However, one question that the book club had was your reason for bringing Hadley in rather than staying in Marion's time period.
Hi, Mrs. Adamson. Thanks for coming. This is a question a lot of people ask, and I think it's valid and was something I thought about and also talked about with my editor and with my agent, who's really my first reader. I mean, for me, there were a couple of reasons. One was sort of the tonal reason I was talking about earlier. I just wanted this sort of, I call it like sour, citrusy, like modern voice to sort of cut through this big sort of loaf of historical fiction that I was otherwise working with. For me, it was kind of a relief. It just broke up the book. And then sort of a more fundamental reason, I think, was that, through this lens of Hadley, I was trying to show how much of a life is lost when the person dies. So there's sort of this game of telephone happening between Marion's life and Hadley's, where, Marion disappears and leaves behind her notebook, which sort of is published and then becomes the basis for a novel, which is becoming the basis for a movie. And Hadley, as a famous person whose life is always being sort of extrapolated about and gossiped about and by all these millions of strangers, and people think they know her and they don't, she has this sort of innate understanding that people won't be able to really know Marion. And so she's coming into this task of playing Marion with an understanding that this person is unknowable fundamentally. And the reader gets, a really close look at Marion's life and then can see 65 years later how wrong everyone is in trying to reconstruct her story and how we're always trying to piece together narratives. But there's no way of really knowing this person who has taken all her thoughts and feelings with her, when she vanished. So that was kind of the bigger thing, was this just getting at, the sort of deep privacy of a life, and also kind of the futility of trying to represent someone as a story.
All right, I think we just have time for maybe one last question. So what I'd like to know from both of you is what are you doing now? So Maggie, I know you just finished this book and you're on tour, but do you have something else kind of in the works? And Chloe, also, what are you working on? What's the next from both of you, do you think?
So I have a collection of short stories coming out next summer, which I sold with this book and kind of had, they've all been published in small journals and magazines. So that's nice. That takes the heat off a little bit, but I have started another novel. I had a few false starts during the pandemic. The pandemic was not productive period for me. But like I was saying to Chloe, I'm trying to do more of a family, more limited saga with less research. I think it'll be set in LA. I would like it to be shorter and I would like it to not take 7 years.
I am working on my third book. I also had a weird very difficult pandemic experience of putting away a novel that I'd been working on for 4 years. And that was just a brutal decision, and was only softened by the fact that around that time I got the idea for the book that I'm working on now. And I don't get ideas very often. I think one of the reasons I'm not a short story writer is because I have an idea like every 5 years. So I then switched, and I've been working on that book for about a year, and thank God, you know, I think it's the right book, at least for now, but that was definitely painful. So that's where I am.
Well, thank you so much to both of you. We are just about at the hour, and so we're going to wrap up. And for those of you who attended tonight, thank you so much. I want to remind you, in case you came in late, the link to buy the book from Warwick's is in the chat. That's my child waving in the back, even though I told her I was busy working. So, hey, we're still in COVID, right? But there's also a coupon code there. Please use that, support your local bookstores. And we have no green room because we're just on live. And so with that, we're gonna say a huge thank you to both Maggie and Chloe so much for being here, to Julie from Warwick's, and to your publisher, Penguin Random House, for sending you tonight. And with that, I think we're gonna wish everybody a good night. Take care, be safe, and I hope that we get to do events with you in person, maybe sometime soon, maybe when these next projects come out. What do you think? All right.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you all so much. We will see you again soon, hopefully. Take care and good night.
Thank you so much.